Wokes are focused on moral innovation. Techs are focused on tech innovation. And in fact, both tech and woke are like two sinusoidal parallel movements that both arose like sort of after World War II, whether it's like desegregation for the wokes and the transistor, right? You can kind of see moments, internet boots up and the 60s protests, and then the microcomputer and PCs in the 80s, and, some of the protests over like the Clinton era, PC stuff. Both PCs were in the late 80s and early 90s, right? And so on and so forth. Like tech and woke have sort of been growing out of the post-1945 dispensation. And tech is actually very opposed to communism, and woke is very opposed to fascism.
I'm Erik Torenberg, and this is Upstream with Erik Torenberg. Balaji is an accomplished entrepreneur, exec, investor, and intellectual. While he's built big companies with Coinbase and Counsyl, his biggest impact is opening the aperture of what's possible intellectually in tech, and understanding not just how tech works, but also how culture and politics works. He's most recently in the news for his bet that Bitcoin will hit $1 million in 90 days. A bet he knows he'll lose, but he's doing it to warn people about the oncoming banking crisis. We recorded this episode before we made the bet, but it's actually a great time to release the episode because in it, we talk about his past predictions as well as his future predictions, like how the left will transition from wokeism to statism, how the right will transition from conservatism to Bitcoin maximalism, and how we'll organize digital communities into IRL sovereign network states over the next few decades. Those things may seem crazy, but Balaji has said a lot of things that were once crazy that now sound mainstream, whether it's the advance of genetic engineering, or how crypto will create $1 trillion in market cap within a decade, or that COVID might go viral and we might enter massive lockdowns. So without further ado, here's Balaji. Balaji, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Great to be here, Erik.
So
always
Balaji,
good.
You've made a lot of predictions in the past decade, some of which I don't think you've gotten sufficient credit for. And so I want to kind of revisit and talk about some of the predictions you made that have panned out, some that haven't yet panned out, or some maybe that you've changed your mind on. And so maybe I'll start by framing it. There have been like technological predictions, right? Like there was crypto, there was bio and gene editing stuff. There was it's kind of like transhumanist stuff. Like we said, the world has become more Balaji-like, remote. So there was technological stuff. There was kind of more like trends. There was, I think you predicted a lot of like what was happening between tech and media early on, between just like the political nature of activism and how it was incorporated, into companies. Connor from Rome, once tweeted, the scariest words in the English language are Balaji was right. So maybe let's start by unpacking that quote. Why is that one of the scariest phrases in the English language? And then let's talk about some of the things you've predicted that have panned out and some that haven't yet.
Well, so first, very kind. And, obviously I do make errors, and there's lots of things I've gotten wrong in my life. And, I actually wouldn't even consider my primary identity a predictor per se. But I think that insofar as there's any truth to that observation, I think what I am good at predicting is I look for large secular trends that, if they do get extrapolated all the way out, cause significant consequences, often discomforting consequences, in the sense of things that upset something that's there today. And that's why people are not thinking them all the way through. They are often resistant. They have some mental block on them. And so it's kind of taking a very obvious thing and then taking what the internet does, which is it takes the obvious thing and it scales it all the way out to 1,000x. And it often does so faster than people expect. And then seeing what happens when that obvious thing at small scale becomes obvious at large scale, which is where people are often in denial about it. Now, that doesn't always happen. It's basically like the trajectory of a startup.
Right.
But it happens often enough that, if you can see some of those things and, extrapolate them out, you might make some correct predictions. The other thing is also that I think there's really only kind of two predictions that I find useful, or classes of prediction. The first are sort of vague directional trends, in which case you make an investment of some kind. And I'm not like a good trader, trader. I'm a seed investor. And there's a big difference. A trader is good at somehow predicting the vagaries of market sentiment, right? You can do this with like quant things and historical data and, Soros has a concept of reflexivity. There's people who are good at just predicting this, short charts. You might argue, are they really good at it? Or maybe they're good at, time series analysis and not psychology. But there's people who are good at that. I'm not good at that. What I am good at is predicting that something that's at 1 today might be at 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000x in 5 or 10 years. So that's like a high level trend prediction where you go long on something. Going short on something is very difficult to do unless it's a long short, meaning it's hard to go short on Blockbuster, but you could go long on Netflix. And you don't know exactly when Netflix will disrupt Blockbuster, just that Blockbuster is going to be disrupted at some point. You don't need to nail the timing, just need to be directionally right and bet on those things that are directionally right. So that's one class, like the financial prediction. And the other class is the very micro scale technical prediction, like this drone will land on this ship. You have to get the X's and Y's and thetas and phi's all correct for your trajectory prediction. This diagnostic test, it's giving off A and C and not T and G, okay? So that's a second kind of prediction, which is extremely micro. And if you get it wrong, your plane crashes or your test doesn't work, or your intrusion isn't detected or something like that. That's like more of a physics or machine learning style prediction. So those are the two kinds of predictions I think are useful. Things I don't think are useful are things like, what will be the value of this government statistic in a few days? Or, predict this binary variable and, this one outcome, and then everything is levered on whether that is predicted correctly or not. Even that's not really good. You actually want to have like 50 or 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 binary outcomes, then look at your calibration of probabilities. And if you predict 60%, then you should see 61s and 40 zeros. So anyway, those are the two kinds of predictions I think are valuable. The long-term sort of trend prediction, the short-term micro technical prediction. So go ahead.
I was going to say, one thing I appreciate is that you're also willing to change your predictions based on how the facts change. Like, what happened in China in the past year has kind of somewhat modified your view of what's likely to happen there. And I'm curious for the moments that changed kind of your mental model. And I have a question as to if one of your beliefs is that it's difficult to recapture institutions, and instead you just have to create new ones. And I'm curious if Elon and Twitter is an exception to the rule, or that proves the rule, or is it a genuine additional approach?
Violation of the rule. Yeah, good question. So starting with that, I think a slightly more precise framing is the older the institution is, the harder it is to reform and recapture, and the better it is to build a new one. Tech companies are way younger and have still much more of a genuinely hierarchical structure than, US government institutions. And so as such, I've said actually for a while, I think they are more amenable to take over and reform than government agencies. But even still, you would typically do a startup to disrupt rather than take over and reform. TikTok was started well after Twitter, and it's bigger than Twitter. And that's like one example. Nikita Beer has gas, and that seems to be doing really well. But, it is, so those two things can be true at the same time. You'd probably usually do a startup to compete with a giant company, but it is also easier to take over and turn around a giant company than it is to turn around a government agency, let alone the whole government.
Yeah.
So that's the second part. And then the first thing is, again, on the predictions and stuff, Ben Horowitz and many others have made this observation that a batter who bats 300 is crushing it. They're missing 70% of the time, right? And I kind of think I've built devices that have worked, like diagnostic tests and, robots that move into the right position, the inverse kinematics, you can implement it and the hand moves to the right position. So the micro predictions, I've been able to do them okay, and the macro predictions, I've been a fairly successful investor, with many different investments. But I wouldn't call myself like a seer or something like that. I just want to qualify that. Go ahead. Yeah.
One of your models that has been interesting to me and has been kind of, recent events, FTX and Twitter files have kind of shown a bit more true, is that, your observation that when people are talking about like saving journalism, they're really talking about saving journalists. Or when people talk about saving democracy, they're really talking about saving the Democratic Party. And this broader observation you have that ideas like Christianity, capitalism, democracy, socialism have often meant like very different things and even contradictory things, depending on who's using them and what their interests are at any given time. Which begs the question: are ideas kind of just like weapons for people to use at each other? Like,
it's a great. I mean, so ideologies can be. So just to be concrete, right? Like Christianity both justified tearing down the Roman Empire and building up the much later Holy Roman Empire, which, Christianity, I mean, oftentimes you have that thesis and antithesis that form a synthesis, right? Christianity and the Roman Empire were at hammers and tongs. And then whatever 100 years later, there's this fusion entity that justifies itself as the successors of the Roman Empire, but of course they're also all good Christians.
The Christian king.
Nietzsche talked about this out.
The Christian king.
The Christian king. Exactly. That's right. And so I talk about this in the Network State book, that you have, for example, in China, you have the communists who are against the capitalists. But then you have, by the 1990s, you had the capitalist member of the Communist Party, the CCP entrepreneur, right? Or another example in China, you have the communists fighting, Maoist communists fought, Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists. And now the communists are ultra-Chinese nationalists, and they defend themselves on the basis of being the inheritors of traditional Chinese culture. And actually, Chiang Kai-shek is more celebrated in some ways on the Chinese mainland than he is within China, than within Taiwan, rather, right? And, so the communists have become nationalists. And, this is something you'll actually see frequently, is these two sides just go at each other. And then, like a few years later, maybe a decade or so later, they just sort of figure it out. Like, the neocons and the, many Democrats were hammer and tongs in the 2000s. And now suddenly they're on the same side, right? On Ukraine and many other kinds of issues, right? So you have, this is just something which is just a human thing. You can see it many, many different times. But the thing that you mentioned, which is that an ideology can mean both X and its opposite. Well, when you have scripture, if you have sufficiently complicated scripture, you can go and quote a passage that means turn the other cheek, or you can quote it to mean some fire and brimstone damnation of somebody, right? And any sufficiently complicated body of literature can either be quoted out of context or selectively in this way to achieve whatever objective. And this is, related to the concept of Russell conjugation, right? Which Eric Weinstein talks about and many others have talked about. Bertrand Russell introduced it. I dox, you leak, but the New York Times investigates, And anyway, so that's cynical, but that's also different than saying, something that is, Euler's formula, e to the I pi plus 1 equals 0.
Yeah.
That is an idea. It's not an ideology, right? That's neutral. So I don't believe that everything is political. I talk about this in the book. There's that spectrum between technical truths and political truths. It is a deep insight that, history is often written by the victors. But it's also true that if that was the only thing that was there, then we wouldn't have a history of, we wouldn't have star charts. We wouldn't have, functional agriculture. It would basically say, go and worship the sun god and you'll grow the agriculture. There had to be some technical facts that were passed down without political interference for us to maintain our civilization. That's like this struggle in humanity.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I want to recommend a couple other shows that we also run. One is Moment of Zen, which I co-host with Dan Romero and Antonio Garcia Martinez. We talk about everything from tech to history, philosophy. We've also featured Mark Andreessen and Balaji on those podcasts, so I recommend you checking them out. My other show is Cognitive Revolution. It's an AI show that I co-host with Nathan Labenz. I recommend listening if you want to stay up to date with all things AI. SecureFrame is the leading all-in-one platform for security and privacy compliance. Get SOC 2 audit ready in weeks, not months. I believe in SecureFrame so much that I invested in it, and I recommend it to all my portfolio companies. Sign up for a free demo and mention Upstream during your demo to get 20% off your first year. Now, more than ever, startup founders need a safe place to put their cash. Mercury protects your money and also provides the streamlined user experience that great founders expect. Through partner banks and their sweep networks, Mercury offers up to $5 million in FDIC insurance, which is 20 times the per bank limit. They also make it easy to invest any cash above the FDIC insured amount in a money market fund. 100,000 startups trust Mercury with their finances. I've been a happy Mercury customer and have found their team incredibly helpful and responsive. They even got an important wire out of purgatory on Christmas Eve. After all, your Christmas is my opportunity. Visit Mercury.com to get started. Mercury is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services provided by Choice Financial Group and Evolve Bank and Trust, members FDIC. Marketer Hire is one of my favorite resources for startups looking to hire marketers. With thousands of pre-vetted marketers across a dozen roles, Marketer Hire matches you to your perfect marketer in 48 hours. Whether you need help with growth marketing, SEO, lifecycle, content, or any other aspect of your marketing strategy, Marketer Hire has you covered. So if you're a founder looking for top-notch marketing talent to help grow your startup, head over to marketerhire.com to find your perfect match. Sign up with referral code UPSTREAM and you'll get $1,000 credit on your first hire. One of your other observations is that in the early 2010s, or from for most of the past couple decades, you could build a tech company and not have to think about politics at all. But There's something happened in the last few years that now people have to be a lot more cognizant of politics. In a way, it's part of building your whole stack. Your concept there. Why don't you unpack that?
Yeah, sure. I don't think you start with a tech company anymore. I think you start with a tech community.
Say more about that.
Okay, and why do I say that? Because what are countries, right? You can think of them as like platforms that you target. Just like you target iOS or Android. Okay, and you have to, that's part of your strategy. You're thinking about, you're using React Native or using iOS or Android tools, and you're like, Android is used by many people in the world, but it's lower dollar value. Like that platform that you're targeting goes all the way up to the product itself. And it's a huge decision. Like Instagram was just iOS only, which was controversial early on, but turned out to be right. Then they did Android. Okay. Do you target the web? Do you, are you doing enterprise? Like these are decisions that affect the product, right? So clearly what platform you're targeting matters. Clearly what country you're targeting matters because, just as an example, do you start with all your content in English or, are you starting out of Poland, in which case you need to build probably internationalization into the website from the very, very beginning, okay? Europeans, Indians tend to think international from the very beginning because they don't have the large domestic market in the same way. It's starting to change for India, but and of course they've got the EU, but like in terms of at least languages, people think about translation earlier there, right? And so the point is that basically those are things which we know are variable, right? We know the tech platforms vary, iOS, Android different, the countries vary. What's happened thanks to the internet over the last 20 years, I think there was a good reason to connect people. Lots of new friends were made. But you know what else was made when you connect lots of people?
Enemies?
Lots of new enemies, okay? And essentially the offline world pre-1990 was a result of an enormous number of fights where all these people eventually kind of got pulled into various regions. Like, for example, post-World War II, there was massive ethnic cleansing of all these Germans. And, everybody was mad at the Germans. And ethnic Germans got like pushed into Germany or just like killed or whatever at the end of it. And, of course, Germans themselves killed a bunch of people before it, right? And so a lot of those borders in Europe and in other places today are peaceful or were peaceful and quiescent for a long time, but reflected a whole fractious process running up to that. And, what was happening before the internet is you might have had some, Archie Bunker, warehouse worker type thinking what he's thinking, cracking his jokes to his friends, and then some very hoity-toity, college professor thinking what they're thinking to themselves, and then they're put on Twitter and now they just can't stand each other. They're not, ignorance was bliss, right? Now each of their insane comments basically is pushed into their guys, not just into their like sphere, into their literal face. Where they're holding up their phone and the most.
Yeah, no, I was laughing. Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So like the most insane possible thing from someone who's just so polar opposite to you is stimulating and just push into your face, push a notification, and they're attacking you. So, I'm going to push back against this guy. And so what's happened, one way of thinking about it from a border standpoint, groups that had just sort of being separated by all kinds of processes, the good fences make good neighbors, right? They had self-selected, they had migrated, they had language borders, country borders, practical borders. They were suddenly all pushed into one gigantic room, or one gigantic continent rather, okay? It's like this cloud Atlantis descended from the heavens. And, if you think about how many hours a day you spend on the internet, right?
All day.
How many hours a day do you spend on the internet?
In front of a screen all day,
All day, right? Many people, it's like 8 hours a day or something like that. So you can imagine yourself, you wake up and you telecommute up, 8 hours in the cloud, and then you come back down and you're spending your time on the land. And when are you on the land? When there's no screens. There's no Apple Watch. There's no iPhone. There's no laptop. There's no big screen. There's no screens of any kind. You're just in the physical world, and the only proximity you have is to other physical people, okay? For many people, that's a minority of their time now. Their proximity is not their physical proximity, it's their digital proximity to people up in the cloud. Oh, and by the way, even when you're disconnected, people are still taking swings at your avatar up over here. So you might need to just basically, you did your daily commute, might have to do a nightly commute to come back up and enter the arena once again, right? Put all the helmet.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah? Okay, so this cloud Atlantis is something where, with the exception of China, it doesn't mirror all the borders of the world that existed before it, right? You have billions of people just put into this gigantic arena, and they're all just slugging it out in the cloud, and new borders. I mean, A blocks B is the most pathetic bilateral border. Of course, there are borders in the sense of silos between tech companies and stuff like that. But, those are genuine communities like Pinterest and Instagram and LinkedIn have different cultures. But those are like offline countries in the sense of there's more common culture in a sense within than between, right? And, we're still at the earliest days of this, with the New World, with the, the various quote colonies in the New World. People thought of that as English and Spanish and, French and so on and so forth. They didn't yet think of them as their own countries. But eventually over time, those settlements started to take on a sense of national sentiment of their own and became America and all the countries in Latin America and Canada and what have you, right? And so we're in the early stages of that, but I think that's going to happen. Cloud nationalism, internet nationalism, internationalism, where people within these networks up here start feeling closer connections than to other people who were maybe their countrymen offline, but are certainly not part of their states of mind online, So that's basically what's happened is all the connections. So now bringing it back up. So what that means is just like you can't just, take your platform for granted. You can't take your country for granted. You cannot take your cloud community for granted. You are selling into that market just as much as you are deploying an iOS or Android, just as much as you are, operating in the US or the EU or India or Japan, right? And so once you realize that, it's intrinsically political to say I am, operating in the US versus I'm operating in, the Middle East or something like that, right? You're operating in Dubai. It has different laws, right? There's different things. Things that are legal here are illegal there and vice versa, right? That's do we think of that as political? Well, the reason when people say something is political, what are they really getting at? Just to poke at that. It's do you know how market depth works in crypto?
Not a ton.
Exchange. Okay. So if you go to any crypto exchange, you will see an order book, which looks like a sort of two triangles like this, like a V, all right? And here's all the buy orders are a triangle on this side. And here's all the sell orders, that's a triangle on this side. And the mid-market over here between, just imagine these two triangles, it's almost like an M, right? The mid-market right over here is the current price. Now there's lots of buy orders, that price moves up. There's lots of sell orders, that price moves down, all right? Now, most people in the offline world, you're a price taker. When you go to the supermarket, you go and, you get some orange juice, you're paying, I don't know, $3 or whatever it is for a quart of orange juice. I don't even know what the prices are on orange juice. I hate orange juice, but I'm just giving an example, right? It might be $50 in inflation America now. Okay. But so if you're just buying 1 quart or whatever, you're paying a certain amount of money. So let's say it's like $4 a liter. All right. Okay, fine. So just give an exact price. So fine. So you're paying $4 per liter of orange juice. Okay. If you buy one. But now let's say you go clean out all the shelves. You buy all 100 units of orange juice at that store for $4. Now you walk over to the next store. They've heard when you're coming. Now you're paying $4.50 for their 50 units of orange juice. Then you go to the next store. They've heard you're coming. Now you're paying $5 per unit for the next 70 units of orange juice you can get. Okay. So you started to buy so much, you started to shift up the mid-market price. You're no longer just a price taker. You're actually affecting the price of the market. Okay. That's like, shoot, we're seeing volatility in the market, right? Similarly, if you dumped a bunch of orange juice, you'd start to see prices crash. Okay. And so now in the same way, that's called market depth, right? That's like, the price evolution in cryptocurrencies and stocks. A very similar thing happens with the so-called Overton window, okay? And what happens there is you've got a window of what is politically radical on both sides and what is conventional wisdom as of right now. And what happens is that if market depth is about like price, this is about like political support. And so you imagine you have like vote banks on either side, right? And this side wants to make the policy more stringent. And this policy wants to make this side wants to make the policy more relaxed, okay? And if all that happens, at some point, what could happen is one side gets the advantage and they can push the policy over. So policy starts moving in real time, just like a price starts shifting. Wait a second, I thought orange juice was $4. No, it's $4.50, it's $5, it's $10. What the heck is happening? I budgeted for this, right? That's when people are like, wait, they don't like volatility in prices. And when people say things are getting political, they're talking about volatility in policy.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yep.
It's exactly the same thing. If you can amass enough money, you can move a price because you can, right? And if you can amass enough votes, you can, or support more generally, you can move a policy.
Yeah.
Right? And when people feel, wait a second, this thing I thought was constant is becoming a variable, that's what they're reacting to when they say it's getting political. Now, if it moves and then it's constant for a long time, now people can adapt to it. And so you wouldn't call it political that there are differences in law between the US and Dubai or the US and, I don't know, Japan or something like that, right? That's not considered political. Oh, they're different political units, but it doesn't feel like it's shifting in real time. It's when within a country, policies are shifting in real time and you're like, what the heck is going on? That's when people say it's political. And that's what's happening due to the internet because you're now having this support over here or over here that's pushing something down or up. And that's what people are reacting to.
And not only policy, but also sentiments around like, customer sentiment or investor sentiment, or your social supply chain, your idea there, where people might these movements could be the equivalent of like a pump and dump that could affect the sentiment could change quickly in a way, or even employee sentiment.
The current thing is like a social scam. If you go and punch into Google Trends any of the hot button keywords over the last 10 years,
defund the police,
you see a ski slope graph, right? That looks exactly like a pump and dump of a stock. Okay, it just goes soaring up and then crashes down like this. Now, the thing is, a pump and dump of a stock is bad. A pump and dump of a stock is bad, but at least everybody who's part of it opted into it, right? They all, you can't con an honest man or whatever. Somebody thought they were going to get fast gains, they bought into this stupid thing or whatever, right? Not to say those things are good, but at least the damage is limited to those who got into the arena, right? The social scam is much worse. Because all these people who scream this thing, they get tons of followers on the way up on the social scam. And then it goes down and everybody who's just affected by the misinformation are the ones that are hurt by it. They can't opt out of that, right? And because all of these critters say the same thing at the same time, then, there's like 1,000 people who all said it and everyone's like, oh, that guy. And there's no way to blame, right? This is what I call the school of fish strategy, right? The school of fish strategy is basically, it's like, just say the same thing everybody else is saying. And if everybody's wrong, anybody's wrong, everybody's wrong. Who could have known, right? But then if there's one person who sticks out, you can all gang up on them if they're ever wrong on something.
It feels like in the last few years, we've built up more cultural immunity to current things because I guess we've just become so familiar with them. Maybe it's like the boy who cried wolf, but it feels like it's harder today to have something that was happened in 2020, for example,
Yes, but there's a cost to that, which is the immunity to the current thing means just a lower trust society, right? So what happens is the fire break, right? It used to be that if A told you something and B told you, it would just pass like this, right? Because you're in a high trust society where people would exploit that to just, spread these stupid messages. Now you have an adaptation, as you said, which is it's a low trust society. And so then it's like, I don't trust you, you're in the other tribe, right? But that has other consequences where, yes, it does stop the current thing, but it also stops many good things. The scale of cooperation in society, if you don't trust somebody to tell you the news, do you trust them to grow your food, right? Or do lots of other sensitive things? Maybe not over time. Pass your laws, enforce your laws. I don't know, right? And so that adaptation leads to eventually like a fissioning and separation, I think. Yeah. So we're only at the beginning of this, I think.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The one of your other theories is that the logic of sort of the sovereign individual one, the logic of technology determines the logic of violence, or this idea of like.
Well, that's his thesis in the sovereign individual, and I think that's true. But I think there's things that I would update from the book.
Well, say more.
Go ahead.
Well, let me frame it. I was basically just going to say, in the middle of the 20th century, you talk about peak centralization and how technology favored that, and now technology is favoring decentralization. But I'm curious if you still think that's true in a world where both China and America are willing to use the latest technology to censor or even lock down its citizens, and in a world where OpenAI is starting to really gain some steam. Like, is it both decentralized and centralized? Or like, how do you see that playing out? And also, I want to hear where you want to update the book.
Yeah. So first, the Sovereign Individual book is a very good book and worth reading. And for when it was written, it got a phenomenal number of things right. But what happens is everything that you get really, really right, like a huge trend, often arouses a counterforce. The Reformation arouses a counter-Reformation, and decentralization has aroused the counter-decentralization in both the US and China. And in China, that's taken the form of, the Great Firewall and all the top-down control. They've just taken the hit to retain control. And their fundamental premise is, when they say, the system with Chinese characteristics, what they mean is they retain root control. They retain the private keys. They retain ultimate control. Okay. The wisdom of that is being seen today. Wisdom, what should I call it? Let's call it at least the farsightedness. There are people who, for example, The Atlantic, there's this guy, I think Jack Goldsmith wrote, internet speech will never go back to normal. In the debate over freedom versus control of the global network, China was largely correct and the US was wrong. Okay. So there's a fair number of folks in the US establishment who regret not having controlled social media more aggressively than they did, because now they allowed all of these proles to get freedom of speech, right? That's what happened. I mean, that's the thing is, these people are like, oh my God, Twitter and Facebook are a threat to our democracy, blah, blah. The reason they're mad is that Twitter and Facebook are ultra democracy. They're giving all these people a say who didn't have a say before, right? The reason they're mad is because they're actually granting the freedom of speech that was nominally promised to people, that was not actually available to them, because you only have freedom of speech if you own a media corporation and paid for a very expensive TV or broadcasting or radio license, right? So when they say, quote, our democracy, it's a little bit like, people talking about, oh, communism was so great for the workers, while the USSR put workers in gulags and broke the strike of solidarity. The last thing they want is, quote, democracy in the sense of individual rights and being able to speak for yourself, right? So now the Chinese are at least straightforward about this. They're like, yes, we do not want individuals to say something. They're making the argument that the greater good is better than the individual, right? In a sense, that is straightforward, right? And it's just more down the middle, And because of that, they have just implemented top-down controls and all this stuff. Okay. That's not to say that they aren't like somewhat responsive. It seems that they've loosened up on all the COVID stuff recently after all this, massive protest caused it, but it does seem like, they don't have a total death wish or whatever on it. On the other side, the other kind of counter decentralization is not state directives in China, but what's emerging is something where you have like the exact balance, I don't know, and it's TBD, and there's many possible outcomes. But you have a weird corporate state fusion in the US with a bunch of different factions, of which in many ways the corporations are the most agile in terms of deplatforming, unbanking, silencing, censoring, etc., people who disagree with the regime. And then you have the third faction, which is the re-decentralization. That is Satoshi and Web3 and cryptocurrency and so on. That's like the third faction, right? So the first thing is that it's not as straightforward as just a straight shot decentralization wins. It is, I think, decentralization gives rise to counter decentralization, gives rise to re-decentralization. Now we have at least three factions globally, which I call in the book NYT, CCP, BTC, right? As just catchy. Of course, they're reductive, but they're catchy titles for what they are, right? Okay. The other thing is so that's one aspect of the sovereign individual. How could it have gotten that right? That's like taking this extremely non-obvious thing, playing it all the way out, and then finding non-obvious conclusions. It was pretty impressive where they got to, despite that. Okay. The other thing on the logic of violence that they got, I don't say wrong, but incomplete, is they gamed out crypto, but not drones and not VR. Okay, and why is that? So with drones in particular, right? One way of thinking about it is if the state, because of encryption, cannot seize the money, like in Venezuela, right? Then it cannot pay the conscripts, it can't pay the police, it can't pay the soldiers, and therefore it can't simply. If it loses legitimacy, it can't just enforce laws because it's not able to even pay its own, military or police to go and do and beat up people, right? That's part of the sovereign individual thesis. Do you know what the counter argument to that is?
No, what?
Well, you don't have to pay a drone, you just have to charge it, right? So the entire concept of the principal agent problem, right, where you have a principal, like a principal is like a VC and an agent is a CEO, or the principal is like the CEO and the agent is like an engineer, okay? And whenever you've got a principal agent problem, you've got a 2x2 matrix where the principal can win or lose and the agent can win or lose. So for example, a VC and CEO, there's a win-win quadrant where both them win, where there's an exit and both them make money. There's win-lose where the VC sells, right? But the CEO, the CEO doesn't get money, right? Conversely, there's lose-win where the CEO sells at a valuation where the VC doesn't make money. This is one example, right? Depending on the terms, both those situations can arise. So an example of where you could have a sale where the VC makes money and the CEO doesn't is like 3x liquidation preferences, right? And the VC makes money and the founding team doesn't get it. Or the CEO could sell and the VC might not make something in a variety of other circumstances, okay? Or it might not be a significant return for the VC, but it's life-changing for the executive. And then, of course, there's lose-lose where both go bankrupt,
yes,
right? So all four quadrants are possible. We've seen all four quadrants. And the goal is to try to make the win-win so much more valuable than the off-diagonals that people just go for that, okay? Now, the thing is, there's different ways of resolving the principal agent problem. One is the concept of alignment that we always talk about in tech. And aligning means diagonally aligning it. So lose-lose and win-win are the only two things that are common. And what happens is once you have not just two people, but three people, what happens to three people? It's not just 2 by 2, it's 2 by 2 by 2. Yeah. Because you could do win-win-win, win-win-lose, all 8 possible outcomes, 2 to the third. And if you have n people, you have 2 to the n possible outcomes. You have a whole hypercube of possible outcomes with n people. And so that's why you have equity. It's like everybody wins when the whole company exits, or everybody loses if it goes to 0. And don't even think about all the off-diagonal cases where half the team could gang up on the other half the team and loot internally, okay? So that's one way of doing it, which is alignment. Another way of doing it is minimize the number of people in the org chart, because every edge in the org chart is a principal agent problem. And do you know what the limit case is of minimizing the number of people in the org chart?
No.
One person who has AI and drones doing everything. That may be where people go. That's maybe where states go when humans refuse to do the job. They just have drones that they can plug in and charge. Now, of course, it's not as simple as that because, the drones have screws and batteries and parts and factories and supply chains. But net, it may turn out that they need fewer humans to maintain consent. It's the opposite of the 20th century, where it was mass media and mass production, and you needed ideologies that appealed to the masses of democracy and communism and fascism. All of this had mass appeal, right? Lowest common denominator. Here, all that may matter is your AI and crypto engineers. Yeah. The robots to build the robots, and the crypto to encrypt the communications, or cryptography to encrypt the communications and send the money. And so it's like a totally different model than the 20th century in terms of how you protect the treasury and the military and so on and so forth, right? Now, I'm not saying you just jump directly to that. People had horses in World War I. They started out with that as a transitional phase, okay? But that's where one might go. And what that means is the logic of violence is not as simple as in the sovereign individual, because the autonomous robot challenges the sovereign individual.
Yep.
The autonomous robot, is basically, it allows the individual to be sovereign, but that individual, that's the other, paradox, by the way. I mentioned there's a few different factors. One is the autonomous robot. The second is when I say the individual sovereign, the logic of the sovereign individual is that one person can become super powerful. Well, guess what? What if that one person is Xi Jinping? Well, then he makes you not super powerful. Okay? So that's the individual sovereign. When one person gets really powerful, they can reduce the power of others. Okay? And the third wrinkle, so the autonomous robot, the individual sovereign, and the third wrinkle is the sovereign collective. Because very few individuals are truly, truly sovereign. Remember that post by Steve Jobs that just came out as like, I don't grow my own food. I don't, carpent my, do my own chairs. He's basically giving credit to all these other amazing people around him for whom he totally depends on all kinds of things, right? It's a distributed computation system. And as strong as his ego was, and he is a great man, he truly brought Apple all the way back from the brink, he is also self-critical enough to know that he is still dependent upon others, right? Hard to think of a more sovereign individual than Steve Jobs. And yet he also understood that there was a collective aspect to it, right? This is why I'm not like I've never called myself a stereotypical libertarian, because you can overcorrect on that. I think society as a whole currently probably undercorrects in terms of thinking about individual, impact and so on, but it is possible to overcorrect on that, And that's the third corrective, which is a sovereign collective. It's pretty difficult to maintain a civilization or a high standard of living and so on as a single individual. Even with the robots, you're going to have to sleep. We're not yet genetically engineered to require no sleep. Someone has to patrol and so on, right? So you need a collective to be able to do things. That the numbers of people are reducing for sure. Technology is giving a massive amount of leverage. Notch and Satoshi did so much with just one person. But those are my kind of edits to the sovereign individual: the autonomous robot, the individual sovereign, and the sovereign collective. Go ahead.
By the way, I might put this as a blooper in the beginning. I just tell the producer, but we'll just confirm you're in a secure location, right? Mm-hmm. Perfect. Okay, there's a few points I want to jump on there. One is there's this idea that tech has had a hard time kind of coordinating as an industry. Like people say, oh, tech is so powerful, blah, blah, blah. But one example, like tech is powerful, but in a scattered direction. Like tech can't even get like a couple thousand votes in San Francisco to, be able to build in its own city. And, it makes sense that Facebook's not going to coordinate with Apple. They compete with Apple, right? And so there hasn't been this like unifying vision. You mentioned a few years ago that, Bitcoin perhaps should be the flag of technology, but maybe Bitcoin maximalists kind of thwarted that attempt. How do you think about that now? Like what is the flag of technology, or what can or should tech unify around that's feasible?
I think Bitcoin is still going to be the flag of technology in a sense. Because by 2030, I don't know when it happens, but at some point there's going to be a sovereign debt crisis. And what I mean by that is just sovereigns who are printing too much money won't be able to pay it and will start defaulting. This has already happened to places like Argentina and so on, but we're starting to see the monetary system break, these insane inflation rates. At the same time, you've got insane interest rates and, all this, the people are like, oh, we're going to have the roaring 20s. Well, you know what the roaring 20s was? It was the teens with all the printed money, right? I don't know what this decade is, but it might, I don't say for sure, who knows? It's all very highly volatile. Might be like the Great Depression, except the Great Inflation, that might be this decade. And at some point, it's probably going to come down to something like USD versus BTC. At which point you're going to ask, fundamentally, are you a nationalist, right? Do you believe in, the flag and the state and all of these, sort of things? Or do you believe in, let's say, American values more broadly, right? Do you believe in freedom of speech? And do you believe in free markets? And are you a fundamentally internationalist who believes in the equality of man across borders and not simply within one country? Do you actually believe in the rules-based order and not simply think that the only rule is that, your fellow countrymen should remain number one? And you can make, the thing is, I think you can make a consistent argument on either the nationalist or the capitalist side. You can make a consistent argument on either the socialist or the internationalist side. And those are respectively the right and left of the debate. Either you have the right arm capitalist and left arm internationalist going together, or you have the right arm nationalist and the left arm socialist going together. But that's different than how the parties were set up in the 20th century. That's a realignment. This guy Duranimated made actually a pretty good thing, which shows that realignment happening.
I'll put it in the show notes.
Just to drill into this for a second, again, just like we were talking about earlier, sometimes cats and dogs fight, and then they become the same thing, right? So let me make an observation. In 2015 or 2014, before 2014, China was just considered, the back office of, the U.S., right? It was not like a huge topic of controversy, et cetera. In 2012, Obama had said, Romney, you're stuck in the past. Russia's not an issue for us in foreign policy. Okay. Then in 2015, when Trump, came down the escalator, he started saying China, 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 and people made fun of him for that. That was a huge, thing where, the entire sort of internationalist capitalist sentiment of the U.S. for decades had been, not necessarily extremely pro-China, but certainly pro-China enough to do billions and billions and billions of dollars of business each year, right? And even as late as 2019, Obama put out a documentary called American Factory, which was basically playing up the concept of international multilateral capitalism with China, okay? But by 2021, the Democrats had now moved basically to Trump's right, or the Republicans' right, on China. And part of this is, post-COVID, China was now not just a threat to Trump's blue collars, but to Biden's blue checks. Okay? Yeah. And do you see what I'm saying there? It was not simply a threat on it's just taking manufacturing jobs of guys in the Rust Belt that the establishment doesn't care about. It was now becoming a pure competitor and a genuine threat to the empire's power. And so that's why suddenly they quietly moved to Trump's right without ever saying that they were doing that, right? And, Republicans in their own way have taken many of the words and phrases of the anti-war left during the 2000s, the free speech left, and there's individuals that sort of have probably been consistent all the way, like Glenn Greenwald, but that reflects more the Republican Party today than, the 2000s Republican Party. So there's been that switching, the flippening that I talk about in the book. Just to game that out and push that forward a little bit, another sort of, flip like this that I think is possible to happen, I would probably bet on this. I don't know exactly the time frame, but just like the Democrats moved to the right on China, but did so sort of quietly, I kind of think the Democrats may move to the right on immigration.
Interesting.
Okay. Why? Because it's no longer a surefire vote winner. Okay. Latinos are moving to the cultural right. That seems to be a consistent trend across multiple elections. Roy Teixeira, who wrote The Emerging Democrat Majority, has basically repudiated his thesis on Substack and saying, no, this is not necessarily going to be the case. Muslims are allying with Christians in Michigan on cultural issues. You see in the, that tweet with Elon showing the post-Elon Twitter team?
Yeah.
Whether they were actually on H-1B visas or whether they were immigrants who were naturalized or children of immigrants, it was true that that group of people include a lot of folks from Asia, a lot of folks from India, and so on. So maybe H-1Bs and Elon himself being a tech immigrant, they're no longer reliable Democrats either, just like Latinos and just like, the Muslims in Michigan. Obviously, Chinese people, the Chinese government isn't going to let talent come over as easily, and the U.S. establishment doesn't want them to come. They're under suspicion, unfortunately, people of Chinese ethnicity in many places, often of no fault of their own. It's similar in some ways. How far does that go? I don't know, but I do know that it's starting to be like in the 2000s. If you were Muslim in the U.S., people are just side-eyeing people, and you can give all kinds of arguments for maybe that's good or whatever. But I'm just saying that if you were Chinese American or especially a recent Chinese national, water suddenly turned cold, and you might want to go back home simply to be treated better. Of course, there's other problems with that. So maybe you go to Taiwan or Singapore, right? Or some other place with Chinese diaspora. And, you may not have seen this, but evidently the Hill has reported that the border wall, Trump's wall, is being built. And the babies in cages thing is still happening. It's just called, what's it called? It's like minors, hold on, I wouldn't get the exact phrasing. They're calling it something different, right? Migrant children detained at border, right? Okay. Border shelter for teens. See, under Trump, it was babies in cages, but under Biden, it's border shelters for teens.
Border shelter. That makes it sound positive.
Okay. I mean, literally in the NPR headline, it says, fact check, Biden reopens border shelters for teens, but it's not kids in cages. Okay. Right? They're like amateurishly Russian conjugating in the headline. Now, maybe both of those are, it's just actually kind of amazing, right? Okay. So, if you put all that together, it's actually pretty, here we are. Here's the Intercept. Ready? Joe Biden.
Yeah, I'll add it to show it.
Resumes construction of the border wall. Okay. So wait a second. So you add all that stuff up, right? It's Latinos moving to cultural right. It's Muslims seemingly moving to cultural right and allying with Christians, which, by the way, this is actually a flip back to the 80s. You know why?
Why?
In the 80s, you had the Mujahideen in Afghanistan and, some with the Reaganites versus the communists in the Soviet Union, right? If you live long enough, you start to see two gang up on the third and then flip again. If you push the, time frame out, right? So, of course, there's different Muslim people and so on there, but point being that a Christian-Muslim alliance against something on the secular left is not unheard of in history. It does happen, right? And so you add up, all of these things, and then you also add the fact that world patterns of wealth migration and talent migration are not choosing the U.S. as the first place. They're going to Switzerland, they're going to Portugal, they're going to Israel, they're going to Singapore, they're going to Dubai, they're going to Australia and New Zealand, even Canada, but not the U.S. Inbound millionaires to the U.S. is down 85% since 2019. Talent, even in 2020, before BLM and all the riots and all the chaos of 2020 and 2021, had not indicated the U.S. as their number one choice. It was Canada and all these places in Asia, Japan and Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, because the world economy is in Asia. You don't have to go as far, right? So you add up all of that stuff, and there's less political and economic gain from immigration. There's less power gain. Their biggest rivals, and this is really the biggest factor of all, the biggest rivals for the U.S. establishment are not really the American conservatives. American conservatives are just barbarians. They just lack the IQ. Let me put it like this. In that photo of Elon in his conference room at Twitter, how many Southern good old boys were there? Zero, probably, right? Maybe one, okay? No offense to them, but that's not where global engineering talent is coming from. It is the best engineers in the world versus the U.S. establishment versus the Chinese establishment, right? That's what BTC, NYT, CCP, that's what that's about, right? And so this is why, I think Elon wins as a global technologist and he loses as an American conservative. It wins with code, loses with words. There's just something to keep in mind, for him, as he does things. And conversely, for the U.S. establishment, they'll win where they're using the state, and they'll lose when it comes to time for the battle of international markets or the network. Great example, by the way, is this CHIPS Act. Just to digress and rant about this for a second. You know about this thing?
I've heard the policy towards, go for it.
Yeah. So essentially the idea is, we're number one. We're going to ban our way to the top, freeze things in amber. China's never going to figure it out. Okay. Now, here's the thing. Could it slow down China a bit? It's possible. Okay. But in the medium term, here's, this guy, Philip Pilkington, had a good essay on this, and he points out the following. First, and it's a combination of things. There's a CHIPS Act, and then there's a ban on American semi companies selling into China. Okay. Now, there's at least a few consequences of this. The first is, if you are a company that has the non-American company, of which, by the way, most of the world is neither American nor Chinese. Okay. Important to keep in mind, about 75% of the world is neither American nor Chinese by population. So if you're part of that 75% of the world, the majority of the world, super majority of the world, and you have some ambition of someday selling into China, it is not in your interest to hire an American semiconductor engineer. Okay? So in theory, before that American semiconductor engineer might have gotten an offer from Siemens or Intel. Afterwards, he doesn't get the offer from Siemens, only from Intel, which means his effective salary has gone down, right? 2 bidders went to 1 bidder, which means his salary has gone down, which means his career earnings have gone down, which means this profession is less attractive to him than, let's say, software, which means just that provision alone did not make a whole rush of Americans run into semiconductor engineering, but quite the contrary, right? If you're making a rational decision, net lifetime earnings just dropped, who knows how much, but a fair bit. 75% of the world, 95%, if you include China, will no longer employ you, number one. Number two, American software companies can no longer sell into China. Now, look, there's people who may dispute these figures, but I think they're probably directionally accurate. David Goldman estimates that something like for every $5 that American companies are selling into China, they're now getting $1 in subsidies from this CHIPS Act. So first of all, that's a significant reduction in money. But second is the quality of the revenue is far different. An American company that's managing to sell into China is actually very, very, very globally competitive because they're beating all of this, all that pressure, domestic pressure there as well to, buy Chinese or build Chinese, and they're managing to do that. That's high quality revenue in a very, very competitive market. That's revenue that keeps you sharp.
Yeah.
By contrast, $1 of subsidy revenue, all you need to do is lobby the politician to keep it going. The chip doesn't actually have to work. You just need to have news reports and politicians who are invested enough in saying that it works. Okay? And you make it taboo enough to say it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right? So that's much lower quality revenue. And so now what you've done is you've made the American semi companies have less revenue and less quality revenue, and American semi engineers have less availability of jobs and lower paying jobs. What do you think that's going to do? Right? That's just, that's not going to vault you to the front of anything. That is just a very short-sighted thing. And the way to show this, by the way, is you can't ban your way to number one. If the U.S. establishment actually cared about leading in semiconductor engineering, it would be a week of solid-state physicists tweeting from the White House account on band gaps and BJTs, okay, on, MOSFETs and microelectronics.
Yeah.
Right? And you basically have electrical engineers, solid-state physicists, all this stuff. Look, I'm not a semi-engineer, but I did do a bunch of this in my PhD at master's student level a long time ago. And you don't see any of this, right? Are they get into quantum mechanics? No, they're saying math is white supremacy. Okay.
Just to push on that for a second, should China not be banning, American social media networks? What is sort of what are good bans versus not good bans?
Well, here's the thing. It's not just that China banned. It's China banned and they built. Okay. And that's really, really, really hard to do. I was skeptical, for example, that India could pull it off. India also managed to pull it off. Do you remember Free Basics?
Free Basics. That sounds familiar.
Free Basics in the mid-2010s, Facebook was going to do this deal where they offered really low-cost internet to deal with Facebook. And a bunch of Indian tech people and so on fought that, right? And at the time, I didn't have a strong opinion, but I was like, okay, well, fine. You're asking for the ball. You better dunk the ball. And to India's great credit, they did.
So only ban if you can build, going. Basically, what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Build is a more important component, part of it, right? That's the thing, is to just ban, at best buys you time, right? Why do you have to ban? Because that other guy's so far ahead of you that you have nothing domestic. So you're not just playing catch up. You have to play catch up at such a speed that you eventually become competitive. That's really difficult to do, by the way, right? So it's kind of like every CEO. I mean, like this, a lot of the stuff is made very moral, but every CEO has a build versus buy decision on something, and you in general, you build those things that are core to your business, and you buy the stuff that is not, right? You don't have to go and chop down your own lumber for chairs, but login is something that you could conceivably either build in-house or outsource to Facebook or Google, right? Or insource at some point, you know what I mean? That's like an important strategic decision. And then there's other things that you just have to build, like, maybe your own software. But even then, you may want to use open source components, right? And so like that's just a decision you have to make. But without the capability to build, you're not making a decision. No. You're just eating down the seed corn, spending down what you inherit.
I want to return to what you were saying about immigrants, because it's really interesting. One concern of the right about immigrants for a while is that they won't assimilate. But now that's potentially one hope of the right. If you think of assimilation of American values, less as free speech or, free markets, and more as kind of like, justice, equality, and kind of like, extreme social progressive. It's funny, the Russian guy who got out, Viktor Bout, the first thing he did when he went back to Russia was complain about, he said in the US they have 72 genders. That was the thing that was most striking to him. And so, yeah, when America exports its values, is it exporting free speech and free markets, or is it exporting, something else? Is an interesting framework.
Right. Well, there's two different Americas at least, right? You have woke America and tech America, and there was in the 20th century as well. You had communist America and capitalist America, and there were a lot of communists in America. Right. Trotsky raised money in New York.
One thing that's so striking is that the highest IQ people, or a lot of them, were communist. And similarly, like you mentioned that there's no conservatives, at coding at Twitter, or Southern conservatives at least. Like, why are the highest IQ?
With no offense to them, by the way, I'm not dissing them. You're saying,
why are the highest IQ people sometimes susceptible? People who are so technical or so deeply smart about building their company, sometimes susceptible to kind of like more radical ideas around politics or culture.
Well, I think intelligence correlates with ambition, and if you're just doing the same thing, you're not going to make a difference. Usually, basically, what is the outlet for that ambition? If you have some moral critique of society alone, well, it's kind of like if you've ever written a review of a book, okay, maybe for school, maybe just done on your own. The straightforward thing is just to do the down the middle interpretation, okay? I don't know. Moby Dick, it's a book about a guy chasing a whale. But if you can come up with some crazy interpretation that you can somehow support with a bunch of very novel citations from the book, right? About, like, for example, with Macbeth, all the way back in the day, I remember this essay where, maybe I had to write it for school or something like that, where a very high scoring essay on how actually Lady Macbeth, everything in the book was talking about how it was good to kill and be a warrior and so on. And she wasn't able to do that because she was a woman. So she killed in the only way that she could. And so actually it's a feminist, kind of thing, right? So she's actually the good guy and she was held back,
exactly.
Blah, 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 right? And she, had she been able to slay him in battle, she would have done that, right? And, so this is a little bit like, have you seen the reinterpretation of The Lord of the Rings, where Sauron is a good guy and the hobbits are bad guys?
No, I haven't seen it, but I get the idea. Yeah.
The last ring bearer or something like that, right? So the point being that if you're intelligent enough, if you're intelligent and ambitious, you want to make a difference, you want to make a mark on the world. Doing the same thing won't do that, usually. And so people look for innovation. And there's at least two routes. The first is to say, or convince yourself or have someone convince you that society is morally lacking on some dimension, right? Abolish the police, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Or
Exactly.
or technological innovation. I mean, to get to Mars, right? And one of the things I've realized relatively, I mean, not very, very recently, but it just sort of took me some time to put that concisely like that. Wokes are focused on moral innovation. Techs are focused on tech innovation. And in fact, both tech and woke are like two sinusoidal parallel movements that both arose like sort of after World War II, you know, whether it's like desegregation for the wokes and the transistor, right? You can kind of see moments, you know, internet boots up and the 60s protests, and then the microcomputer and PCs in the 80s, and, you know, some of the protests over like the Clinton era, you know, PC stuff. There's both PCs were in the late 80s and early 90s, right? And so on and so forth. Like tech and woke have sort of been growing out of the post 1945 dispensation. And tech is actually very opposed to communism, and woke is very opposed to fascism.
Yeah.
Woke is obviously opposed to fascism because you have the Antifa and so on, right? Tech is obviously opposed to communism, maybe less overtly so, but it's not socialist nationalism, it's internationalist capitalism. You know, it is, it's not communism in one country. It's the opposite of communism in one country. It's capitalism in all countries.
Yeah.
Okay. So what you have is basically the atom smasher of these various eras when, you know, as the 20th century ends, these are the two network ideologies of the West that are going to battle. And there's a third, which is the CCP thing, which is yet different, right? So those are, I think, like those three factions. So basically the wokes are moral innovation, the techs are tech innovation. And that's why they're susceptible to it.
Yeah.
Is because they're looking for something that channels their energies. And simply working at Dunder Mifflin Paper Company doesn't. Right? Now, once you realize this, though, you're like, okay, the techs to win need to have some degree of moral innovation as well. They also need a moral critique of society. But guess what? You know what's interesting? The wokes have come up with such bad moral innovations on so many dimensions, they've managed to break society in the name of fixing it. So it's not too hard to come up with moral innovations that X is bad and Y is good, you know, and to rebuild society in a different way on that. This is a concept of the one commandment I talked about in the book, like startup societies that address very specific moral issues with society.
One thing that's interesting, you know, there have been ideas in the past decade that you've shared, and sometimes people will look at you askance. You know, I remember we were at a dinner before, like in 2019, 2018 with our friends and collaborators, and you said, you know, something, or no, it was a presentation you gave at a friend's house. You said like, hey, tech America and woke America have been aligned against Trump, but in a post-Trump world, once Trump loses, you know, they're going to become more at odds. And, you know, he said something like, you know, we got to watch out for the...
I think that was basically pretty, that was pretty dead on.
And you said we got to watch out for the New York Times. And he said, what? We should love the New York Times. Like, what's wrong with the New York Times? And of course, you know, most recently, like a lot of people have seen kind of, you know, been more sober about that. And so similarly, like some things you've said recently that I think people might look at you askance on, or just surprise, is the idea, like you have a couple ideas. I mean, one is your belief that Bitcoin maximalism is going to take over the right, that hasn't even close to happened yet. It's a long-term prediction, but that like huge if true. And the other is that the left may actually...
I feel even more confident in that.
Yeah, the left may even turn against diversity, like the thing that they were, you know, proponent of.
Well, so first is, let me do the second one first, okay? So by 2030 something, you know, it's possible that just like, for example, think about the Soviet Union, right? In the 80s, it was like officially communist, but by like the 90s or early 2000s, it was rebuilding Orthodox churches. Like a rubber band just snapped back into that previous thing, repudiated the whole past, and so on and so forth, okay? Think about how many people today are actually supportive of all of America's Middle East wars in the 2000s. Who thinks that was a good idea?
Very few.
Very few people. Has there been any reparations paid by the U.S.?
Yeah.
Was BLM about that? Was BLM about Iraq? No, it wasn't, right? Though that was actually something that a lot of living people were guilty of, right? And implicated of. But it's such a large set of people who was implicated in that, okay, well, you know, we're not going to talk about that. So we're going to talk about this 1619 from like 400 years ago, right? And so the thing is that that's an example of like a storyline shift. The 2000s was all about terrorism. And ISIS did continue into the 2010s. But the real storyline of the 2010s, starting early on, was wokeism, and that's like dominated, right? And now there's still tendrils of wokeism that are continuing. But I think this decade for the left, the pivot is from wokeism to statism. From abolish the police to fund the Capitol Police, to trust the police, they'll definitely get the right decision, okay? And, for example, in mid-2020, you had these people burning things outside the White House. Do you remember that? Right? That's actually being talked about less, but they're burning things out the White House. They were tearing down George Washington. And they go 6-7 months later to tearing up over the Capitol. Tearing down George Washington, tearing up. How could anybody attack these symbols of America? Go ahead.
No, I'm just laughing. Yeah, the hypocrisy.
It's, T-E-A-R-I-N-G. It means, it's like obviously two different meanings of the same phrase, right? Or same word. And so J6 was a good moment where when the state was sort of recaptured, now it became holy again and even more sanctified than it had been before. Now the previous anti-war Democrat is cheering for, the fight with Russia. Who cares if oh my God, Trump was so bad for possibly starting a nuclear war. We could never have him there. Nuclear war might just be the price we pay for freedom, or something like that. Okay?
Yeah, exactly.
Price we pay for democracy, rather, okay? And you see people say this in earnest this year, like, hot war with Russia, who cares? You're just a coward,
Yeah.
And then you see this latest thing with SBF where it's like, of course I trust, the police to get the right answer. The guy who 2.5 years ago was literally setting police stations on fire, right? And so you have this bizarre thing where the transition from wokeism to statism is underway, right? Now, to just put this in context, these unprecedented things are, of course, precedented. In, the 1910s and 1900s, the communists in Russia, they would talk about how they're for land, peace, and bread. They were against the death penalty on principle, even for like hardened criminals and so on and so forth. And then what happened when they took over? Blam, just you get shot in the back of the neck, no due process or anything like that, right? They weren't for peace. Trotsky built the Red Army, right? They weren't for the workers. They put them to work in the, White Sea Labor Canal, just digging the frost with their bare hands, poor guys, right? And so, right? Yeah. So that transition from this sort of, we're just all vegan, peaceful, whatever, to just like this fanged monster has happened before, right? And, this actually also, a different way in China, communist rhetoric was used to capture the entire country. When Deng Xiaoping turned the country to capitalism, it's not like he gave back the country to a bunch of different warlords or something like that. The lies that they used to gain power did not result in like that territory being taken away. They just pivoted the territory to something else. Okay. This is a non-obvious point, is that like, it's not like America now feeling that it's, it's changed its mind about all the Middle East stuff. Has it gone and taken the bases out of the Middle East? Okay, maybe it's not in Afghanistan anymore. Maybe it's not in Iraq, but there's still all kinds of aircraft flying all over the region.
Right.
And, Guantanamo is still around, all this stuff, right? So the thing about this is that territory earned under slogan A is kept when it switches to ideology B, okay? And so in the pivot from wokeism to statism, the establishment is actually coming back about 30 points to the right. From the far left, they're coming back somewhat to the center. And you're seeing that on some dimensions. It's sort of stabilizing back. Do you know who else did this? Lenin, the new economic policy. Do you know what that was? After the Soviet, after the communists won the Russian Civil War, 1917 to 1921, from 21 to 29, Lenin put in place a so-called new economic policy, which is like, capitalism of some kind is okay. And that kind of took the boot off the neck of some of the small businessmen. And it kind of quelled some of the unrest and allowed the communists to consolidate power during the 20s. And then, of course, Stalin dialed the Red Terror back up in the 30s. Okay? But this is a common kind of thing. You acquire power under just terrorism, like, 1917 to 1921 in the Soviet Union, or frankly, 2020 in America. And then you kind of ease up.
Yep.
Okay? You ease up a bit and you allow people to get comfortable and so on and so forth. Okay? And so coming back 30 points to the right and, starting foreign wars and confronting not just Russia, but Russia and China at the same time. There's a bunch of folks who are just happy that the U.S. is just fighting guys abroad and they're not attacking people at home. They're burning down other countries, not burning, here. And they don't care that it's a fight with two nuclear powers that, like Pelosi is trying to cause a fight, on the base of Taiwan for no reason in the middle of a war with Russia, right? They don't care about that stuff. It's just like America, And the thing about this is that unfortunately will work. There's a fair fraction of people who, once it's no longer BLM, but it's bombs away overseas, will shift back, right? They will kind of come back to the state, okay? Now, so that's a pivot from wokeism to statism. And then by the end of this decade, it'll probably take the form of, unless you hold US dollars, you are a traitor, or something along those lines, right? If you're against the dollar, if you leave America, you're a traitor. If you, do X or Y or Z. And so the nationalism and socialism are merging, just like, the move from the Democrats to take the China issue, just like I previously mentioned, they'll probably take the immigration issue. The most unpredictable, perhaps, thing is they'll eventually flip on race by the 2030s. Why? Because they're going to be, all the blue checks are going to be competing with essentially global technology, which is mostly non-white, which people don't really understand yet, right? It's mostly non-white. It's Indians, but it's South Americans. It's, it's Arabs, it's East Asians, it's everybody, okay? Africans, Nigerians, and so on. Like, you're competing with global technology, and that is bringing your earnings down in competition, which you never had to have before. And so I think it's quite possible that they flip on that. And the immigration thing, flipping on China is like V1. Flipping on immigration is thinkable once you flipped on China. And then flipping on even race,
right?
Just like, and again, the precedent is, it's hard to see that today, okay? But the concept that in the 2000s, when Republicans were going after the terrorists, that but in 2001, Republicans were going after the terrorists. By 2021, Republicans were being called terrorists by the government.
Yeah.
Okay? So the government run by Republicans was going after terrorists, and now the government was calling the Republicans the terrorists, right? The same laws that they passed were now being used against them, yeah? That's quite a flip in 20 years from these people who were so, like gung-ho about protecting America. And then, of course, in 20 years, everybody's a terrorist, okay?
So people in Asia or Africa are going to use the same kind of progressive redistributionist language against sort of like, elite Black and Hispanics in U.S.
Well, because, that's the thing is like, if you go overseas, like basically America is privileged, right? If you apply, woke whites in the U.S. do not apply that lens to themselves typically, right? And now, if you just apply the lens of privilege, who's been privileged for a long time, and what does it actually look like to, quote, check that privilege? It is the rest of the world actually coming up and becoming economically competitive, not simply getting handouts and NGO charity stuff. Charity is dependency. Investment is independence.
I'm laughing at the idea of check your privilege combined with the new MAID laws that Canada is adopting. It's like,
well, I don't actually. What are the MAID laws?
Are like assisted suicide. It's like, people. They're like young people who are dealing with depression and want to kill themselves.
Oh yeah, it's very sad.
Yeah, it's tragic. They're letting them kill themselves without like their parents' supervision. Like overriding their parents. And so you could imagine it's like, in order for me to check my privilege, I'm going to kill myself. It's like,
that sounds like a caricature now, but honestly, you can imagine it getting to that insane level, right? Because there's no recipe on what do you do to make amends for your imagined sins or whatever, right? So basically, though, by 2030 something, it's quite possible that China's the number one economy, India is number 3, right? The US is number 2, but clearly declining. And white privilege doesn't feel so privileged anymore, right? You're already seeing a resentment of like foreigners and whatnot. And as that grows and lots of folks are no longer picking the US as a place to invest in or the place to immigrate to, or even leaving the US and going abroad, you'll see a resentment and anger, and that will be reflected in the same way that the bumptious nationalism of like, the last administration, it was like America, FVA, that there's a version of that that's only slightly more refined, which is we're the democracy and human rights, and all of you brown countries don't have human rights and democracy, right? That's just like a slightly more sophisticated version, but it just so happens that if you go and make all these maps, of Sweden's, maps of democratic freedoms and so on, it's all the rich white countries, right? With the exception of the few that the US has military bases in, like Japan and South Korea and so on, right? So it's essentially synonymous with that. And so all that patronization will, once there's actually rejection and other countries, other people from around the world are able to go their own way, that'll curdle into a resentment. That combined with kind of relative economic decline will lead to, I think, rising nationalism and socialism. So just basically the prediction is, just like it was unthinkable that the Republicans would go from being against terrorists to actually in 2021 being like somewhat sympathetic to the Taliban and feeling like they were the ones who are now being called terrorists, I could see a flippening on that as well with wokeism, where it just turns into like a curdled, resentful chauvinism, at least. If not, quote, racism, maybe racism against Chinese nationals, but certainly American chauvinism, I can absolutely see, right? Just against non-Americans. And then the other side of it, like not opposed to it, but probably also somewhat summing with it, somewhat opposed to it. It's like a vector which has some parts that some and some that are against, is Bitcoin maximalism taking over the Republicans. Why do I think that happens? Because just like wokeism is like a network that's above the Democrats and also somewhat contemptuous of them. It's like a ghost that inhabits the party, but is really an independent thing. It's a network that stands outside the state. So too, Bitcoin maximalism is like a network that stands outside the Republicans. It's like more radical and more principled in a sense than any mere elected or, official could be. Okay. And the thing about it is Bitcoin maximalism rejects it rejects lots of things. It starts with rejecting the Fed, but it goes on actually towards, it's like a left-right combination because it rejects every fortune that was created in America because they're all cantillionaires, aren't they? They got, do you know what the Cantillon effect is? Yeah. Cantillon effect, the first people who get access to the printed money buy more assets with it. And then the poor guy in the Midwest who gets the money last, it's like a hot potato and it has no buying power by the time it gets them, right? So everybody's got assets. They're all cantillionaires. It's all the banks are corrupt, all the governments are corrupt, everybody's corrupt. And there's like that's the thing, is there's a truth to this. Just like, why did communism get a lot of traction in the early 20th century? Because industrial age working conditions were tough. You didn't want, if you've seen like those mines, those factories, they were tough. Were they probably better on average than what preceded them, like more stable in terms of outcome? Yes. But in that adaptation, you did have unscrupulous factory owners. You had things like the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. You had those things. Now, of course, the solution to that is to come up with a system of checks and balances where employers treat employees better and better competition and so on. The non-solution is communism, where both worker and boss end up in a gulag. And it's lose-lose, right? But there was a problem, right? And similarly, like a lot of things that maximalists say are true. The money printing, the political corruption, and so on and so forth. And what's going to happen, though, is basically once they just kind of lose faith in the electoral process entirely, which is starting to happen, and it might be one of those delayed reaction things where, maybe it's 2024 and I don't know, DeSantis is, it's some contentious election and Florida basically pushes for a Quebec-like solution. Quebec?
Yeah, in Canada.
Quebec has like quasi-home rule in Canada, right? So it's part of the union, but it's also kind of not, right? It's got its own special things, right? Lots of things that Florida is doing is it's like setting up its own National Guard. It's got its anti-CDC. It's saying that's not going to enforce federal laws. This is all continuous with actually a lot of the stuff the left started with sanctuary cities. But sanctuary cities, it's gun laws, it's drug laws, it's abortion laws, it's states suing the feds on education. 17 states sued the feds on the 2020 election, and on many other things, right? So all of that probably leads to something where Bitcoin maximalists, maybe they operate at the state level, maybe they're just rejectionist crypto anarchists entirely, but that is sort of to the Republicans what I think wokeness was to the Democrats, and it's like building this decade. And one way of looking at that is it's just totally different from 1950s conservatism. In the same way that like wokeness is very different than communism. There's aspects of it that seem similar, but it's like It's, for example, it operates on the network, not within the factory. It's a network ideology, not a state ideology, not fundamentally. It's got a different demographic. It's for, women and minorities, not for workers and peasants, right? And it is about status redistribution, not money redistribution. There are similarities, but also differences. In the same way, like the nationalist, Republican conservatism is replaced by this sort of militant ultra-libertarianism, which, what's funny about that is for me to say that, people are like, what do you mean? Aren't you an ultra-libertarian? But I'm actually a pragmatist, right? I'm actually pro-civilization. I'm not against all states. I'm for consensual government and opt-in, fundamentally pragmatic in that sense. It is actually possible for there to be a caricature libertarian who's just genuinely, like the people who, like the Free State Project had a lot of good stuff, in principle about it. But all these people moved there, and some of them, the first thing they did is they started to fight like seatbelt laws. Yeah. And it's like, okay, is that like the first thing you want to fight with your political capital over there, or do you want to kind of reform other things? So it's possible to have like an insane ultra-libertarianism that is as insane in its own way. It's so low trust that it's so libertarian that it's anti-capitalist, okay? That no CEO is to be trusted, that every new tech is actually it's a scam or a fraud. It's so cynical that it leaches all the trust out of the public sector as a way to say, okay, now the wokes can't cheat us anymore. Yeah. True, but you also can't build anything anymore. You need some trust to have a society. So those are two things I can see rising, sort of an American chauvinism and a statism that kind of, wokeism transitions to statism, and then a Bitcoin maximalism, which is like a rejection of all institutions. And those come to a head, I think, if and when there's an attempt to seize Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Because that then fractures like society right on that axis that is not the Democrat-Republican axis of left-right, but it's the top-down, bottom-up axis, I think. And I don't know when that comes, but that I think that eventually comes.
So those are interesting polls. But what about kind of Elon taking over the right-wing party, or someone like an Elon? It's interesting, just to zoom out for a second. Sometimes you're a fan of sort of the agree and amplify strategy of,
Sure.
One example might be like, the combination of tech and progressive, like, end genetic privilege by encouraging gene engineering or editing or something like that. A synergy there. And other times you're like, let's reject the frame completely. Whereas like just transition, like don't fight something head to head, just transition to the next platform or next thing. And Elon is, I don't know if he's agreeing or amplifying, but he's certainly fighting, just head on. And there's a possibility of there's people, taking over like conservatism, right? And it seems, or the based billionaire, Peter Thiel's have done this obviously.
I think
go for it.
I think Elon's win strategy would be having all servers in red states relocating to Florida or Texas, and like not leaving there at this point, right? And I think you could maybe win that way, for some definition of win if you have a win scenario. But it's really hard because you're the problem is it's hard to be a man that fights a movement. Okay. This is, you could be a man that fights a man or a movement that beats a man, but it's hard for a man to beat an entire movement. That movement needs to be exhausted in some way, right? Or that man needs to create such a business model that he can align millions and millions and millions and millions of people behind it, right? Elon has part of that, but it doesn't have all of it. It doesn't have like a full parallel economy where everybody who believes in Elon can get a job in Elondia, right? And, that's where crypto could come in handy eventually. But what is the plan to win, right? Basically it's like the, it's overused, but the Sun Tzu thing, a successful, look, Elon's one of the greatest entrepreneurs of all time. I'm not gainsaying that. And he is a genius and he can figure things out. By the way, just to talk about that for a second, why is Elon so respected among our community? Well, we all say, which is true, hardware is hard. Hardware is really hard. And to simply ship like a beige box that sits on a desktop is pretty hard to do, given all the ridiculous supply chain stuff and dealing with China and you just can't iterate on it. And even if you can ship it, it's got low margins and it gets copied and blah, blah, blah. All that is true. And for him to not just ship a beige box, but to ship Tesla and SpaceX, which are not just, an internal, it's not like one beige box. It's like how many different pieces of electronics are in something like that, right? And it's not something which it can crash and then reboot like, it's quite like, it's a good piece of hardware, but like a Dropcam, right? Dropcam is a pretty good company, great company, in fact. But that is a much less ambitious piece of physical hardware than a Tesla, right? In fact, there's essentially Dropcams within Tesla among many other components. And then forget about SpaceX, it's yet another level beyond that. So to do not one incredibly difficult hardware company, but two, to the level of success he's done them, during the crazy supply chain stuff that would kill most normal companies, I don't even understand how it's possible, honestly, right? It's like just something where so many companies got killed in 2020 and 2021 where just supply chains just got choked off, right? And to go to like record highs, even in the printed money environment, I don't even get it, right? This is like, that's why, greatest of all time or what have you, just on Tesla and SpaceX. And then to add on top of that, Boring Company and Neuralink and, PayPal and Zip2, there's a reason that everybody thinks he's the greatest, right? By a lot out there, right? And those are unrelated companies as well. It's not like Google where you have like one code base and you can kind of run search or everything. You get some compounding value. Engineers can move across a code base. You can ship and iterate. None of that is there. You have to stick the landing, right? So it's like ridiculously operationally demanding, incredibly unforgiving in multiple businesses. So given all of that, right, it is true, however, that all you are dealing with at some level is the laws of physics. Like the car has to work, the spaceship has to work. Whereas a social network is more the laws of man. And that's hard. That's not something where you can just solve the equation and it's done, right? And then you just need to sell it. It is something where it'll just keep adapting on you, never stops. So I don't know. What I think is, gun to my head, it's a very low probability prediction, but it feels like best case, this is just, song and dance, and it'll go on forever, just like, Trump, whatever, went on forever. And people will break off of Twitter and do their own mini Twitters. And that's actually good. There's Farcasters and posters and, like there's things on the left, like Tribal, and there's, of course, there's Parler and Truth Social and Gab, and there's a zillion of these now, which is good. It is good to have lots of Twitters and Discords and Reddits and to break away from this giant war zone and for people to find their own communities. And then I hope that just Elon has great physical security and maybe just like lives in an area where where people are, not booing him. Like California is a bad place to be for Twitter's offices and for him physically. It's like being a Sunni and Shiite territory. I'm serious, right? Republican Democrat is an ethnic conflict now, like Sunni Shiite.
This idea of the base billionaire, we've seen a lot of billionaires kind of follow in this like Davos elite class, like even SBF, right? A 30-year-old billionaire, but like, classic Davos elite. Like, do you, when it's just ironic that, billionaires who are so contrarian in the professional life become so like homogenous, once they become billionaires, like, do you imagine a world, it was almost like Galt, like Bezos and like these others just like kind of move over to the Elon side? Or do you think Elon and Thiel will always be like the, just this very small, do you foresee a real counter elite?
Well, yes. But the thing is that here's the important thing. These people may be seen as being on the right in the US, but they're in the left in China.
Interesting.
Right? Which means they're in the global center. Because woke America is the farthest left entity in the world, and communist China is the farthest right country in the world. Like, in woke America, as I've said, whites go to the back of the line for vaccines. Whites are the worst. That's the official ideology. And in communist China, Han Chinese are the best. That's the official ideology, right? Ethno-masochism and ethnic nationalism, right? And in the middle, you have the pseudonymous economy, right? You have global meritocracy. You have the American centrist or conservative, and you have the Chinese liberal. And you have the Israelis, and you have the Indians, and you have South Americans, and everybody who's outside of the binary, Eric. We're contesting the binary, okay?
Non-binary, yeah. Exactly.
Right? And so the thing is that the quote-based billionaire or centrist billionaire or decentralist billionaire, one of the reasons Bitcoin becomes a flag of technology is, that saying like, billionaires are a policy failure. Billionaires should not exist. Well, before Bitcoin, arguably, billionaires did not really exist. And what I mean by that is bearer instrument, like that amount of money to carry on your person or securely outside the reach of the US and Chinese government did not really exist. And I think we're going to see the limit case of that in 2030. Like in Greece, or Cyprus rather, in 2013. Do you know what you've heard of bailouts? You know what a bail-in is? When your deposits in the bank are used to bail out the bank. Okay? So the haircut of like 25% in Cyprus in 2013, Zero Hedge reported on this.
Almost like FTX, or not even because FTX.
Yeah, it's like FTX. Basically, the depositors, okay? Cyprus, 37.5% depositor haircut upgraded to 47.5% Brazilian wax. So basically, something like 47.5% of their deposits were just used to bail out the banks or bail in the banks, okay? One day you wake up, half your money is gone and it's being used to get worthless equity in some stupid, Cyprus bank, okay? That kind of thing has happened in, quote, developing countries all the time. And that may come to the, quote, developed world. I mean, we're seeing the truckers getting their funds frozen. This is one of those things. It's not like there's one fire alarm that rings. Honestly, 2020 was the fire alarm. If 2020 did not wake people up, if the insanity of mid-2020 and literally a month of arson, riots, like armed robberies, crazy glassy-eyed people walking around the streets, people with automatic weapons and masks, cars being pulled over, mobs screaming, the police standing aside and doing nothing or cowed or defeated, right? Like 2020 was a preview, I think, of 2030 in the same way that like 2008 and the bailouts were a preview of like the bailouts of 2020, unfortunately, right? So I don't know. I mean, look, who knows? Maybe it's just maybe I'm wrong. Maybe like all the people are like, it reminds me of The Onion, the counterpoint, no. So basically, this was this great thing here. Just look at that. This war will destabilize the entire Middle East region and set off a global shockwave of anti-Americanism versus no, it won't. Right? And, this was March 2003, right? Mm-hmm. And basically, trust me, it's all going to work out perfect. Nothing is going to happen. It's all under control. Okay, maybe that's true, right? Maybe you can really just base rate the whole thing to infinity, even when all these other indicators are down and to the right. Maybe it'll last much longer than we think. Maybe there'll be some amazing person who comes in and turns around the whole thing in Napoleon or something, and you won't have to do anything.
Yep.
Could be. Very much could be. But it's on my bet.
Yeah.
It's on my bet.
Well, we'll find out. Balaji, I want to let you go. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast. It's been a great episode.
Great.
Awesome.
Talk soon. Oh, by the way, go and read thenetworkstate.com.
Yes, exactly.
Free online.
Must
free
read
online.
Book.
Okay. See you guys.
Take care. SecureFrame is the leading all-in-one platform for security and privacy compliance. Get SOC 2 audit ready in weeks, not months. I believe in SecureFrame so much that I invested in it, and I recommend it to all my portfolio companies. Sign up for a free demo and mention Upstream during your demo to get 20% off your first year. Now, more than ever, startup founders need a safe place to put their cash. Mercury protects your money and also provides the streamlined user experience that great founders expect. Through partner banks and their sweep networks, Mercury offers up to $5 million in FDIC insurance, which is 20 times the per bank limit. They also make it easy to invest any cash above the FDIC insured amount in a money market fund. 100,000 startups trust Mercury with their finances. I've been a happy Mercury customer and have found their team incredibly helpful and responsive. They even got an important wire out of purgatory on Christmas Eve. After all, your Christmas is my opportunity. Visit Mercury.com to get started. Mercury is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services provided by Choice Financial Group and Evolve Bank and Trust, members FDIC. Marketer Hire is one of my favorite resources for startups looking to hire marketers. With thousands of pre-vetted marketers across a dozen roles, Marketer Hire matches you to your perfect marketer in 48 hours. Whether you need help with growth marketing, SEO, lifecycle, content, or any other aspect of your marketing strategy, Marketer Hire has you covered. So if you're a founder looking for top-notch marketing talent to help grow your startup, head over to marketerhire.com to find your perfect match. Sign up with referral code UPSTREAM and you'll get $1,000 credit on your first hire.